Good day and welcome to part 3 of this tutorial to help you get started with Juno Cassandra. In this video we are going to talk specifically about the project setup file. Now some prerequisites for this video is we presume that you've already installed .NET Core 8 and Juno Cassandra Desktop, that you are able to run Juno Cassandra Desktop without an error, and you have followed along with part 1 and part 2 videos for this tutorial, and I'll put the links to those videos in the description box below. Now we explained in the earlier videos all of these different pieces of the puzzle that work together to define a Juno Cassandra model run. In this video we are going to focus specifically on the project setup file, and if you watch the previous video you'll know that discussed in that video the domain model setup file. Now just to reiterate again, these are the different hierarchies of the models in Cassandra. So we have our framework model, which is the algorithm responsible for looping, branching, and optimizing. We have the domain model, which is the rules and submodels for a specific domain, such as bridges, roads, and so on, which is fully customizable. Now, as I said in the previous video, the domain model that we're using for this tutorial is actually a real domain model. It's not a toy model, and it is our default domain model for road networks in Juno Cassandra. On top of all this sits the project level definitions, and this is project specific information, most important of which is the budget constraints or the budget levels. Now of course that is going to vary from one road network to another, or from one infrastructure network to another, and thus from project to project. So this is information that is specific to a project that you define, and that is then percolated through the domain model to the framework model during the model run. And this information is customizable for each project. Now the project setup file is basically an Excel file that defines the following. First of all, the budget constraint sets to use in your model runs. And you have to define these budget constraint sets on different sheets in your project setup file. Next, we have lookup sets and the values that you want to override in your domain model. So as I explained in the previous video, the domain model, you may want to have a single setup file that is shared amongst many projects, but then you want to override some specific values for each project in that domain model lookup file. So the lookup sets and the values that you want to override in your domain model, you can also define in the project setup file. That is optional. You don't have to have that. Then similarly, you can override the treatment unit rates that are defined in the domain model for your project. There's a sheet where you can define the colors to apply in the desktop forecast view. And then you can provide definitions for one or more key performance indicator or KPI sets. And finally, you can also override the objectives and the weights for the multi-criteria decision analysis model that you want to also override in your domain model. So all of these elements that I've highlighted in blue here are optional. You don't have to have them in your project level setup file, but in the tutorial data that you probably have downloaded by now already, you will find that we've provided examples of all of these elements. So let's go over and open up the project setup file and have a look at what's inside. So once again, here we have our folder structure with our workbench sitting inside the work folder, and we're going in the inputs folder. And in the previous video we had a look at the domain model. Now we're going to look at our demo project data file. Okay, so here we have our project demo data file open, and as I said earlier, the key things that you have to have in here is your budget definition sets. Now the budget definition sets in your project level file have to be prefixed with the word budget underscore, and what you put after that underscore is basically the tag or the name for each budget definition. So here I've only got one budget definition in this file, and you can see that I have defined my different, these are mapping to my different categories, budget categories in my domain model definition, and I've given an amount, a cost amount or a limit for each of these budget categories. I don't want to do any block paving or concrete treatments for this tutorial example, so I've put a budget of 0, and I want to have an effectively an unlimited budget for maintenance, so I've put a very high figure for that. All the other treatments I've clumped together in one budget category, so that's what we call an effective monolithic budget, and I've put 2.5 million per year for each of the different modeling periods in there. Now, the number of modeling periods that you have in your budget definition will vary. For example, if you run a model only after 10 years, then only that is valid. But normally I would recommend that you go up to the maximum number of years that you may want to model here. If you want to have more years, you can just take this and drag it down to go up to 40 years or however much you want to. I'm just going to undo that. Just make sure that you always have enough in your budget, otherwise you will get an error. For example, if you specify in your model configuration to run for a model over 40 years, but you only have budget for 35 years, then Cassandra is going to complain and throw an error while you are running the model. Okay, now this tag that you give your budget, that needs to be referenced in your model configuration. Now, you remember from an earlier video that our model configuration we specify in our workbench file. So if we go to our workbench file and we go to our configuration here, then you will see here I've got budget sheet to use. And as the description says here, it's the tag to identify the budget to use. It must match one of the sheets in your project setup file. So you can see here I've got budget mono 2_5. That's a shortcut for 2.5 million. And if I go back to my project setup file, then you'll see that matches to that tag. Now, if I put the wrong name in here, for example, if I put 2.4 in here, then I'm going to get an error at runtime because Cassandra will tell me you've specified this budget sheet, but I can't find it in your project setup file. Okay, so just be very sure that you put the right value in there. Normally, what I would do is if I just put these two files side by side for a second, then what I would do is to go to my project setup file. This is my project setup file, and I would just double click on the sheet name, Control C to copy it, and then I go back to my my workbench file and paste it in there, and then I'm absolutely sure that I've got the right sheet name in there. Okay, remember earlier I spoke about the number of modeling periods. Here I've got 20 years modeling periods, so you can see in my budget I've got more than enough budget definition here to cover that modeling period. So if I want to have a different model, then I would typically just copy this sheet and I would just rename it. So let's say I want to have a 3 million budget, then I would put it like that, like 3, and I would just change this to 3 million and copy this all the way down. And now I can either run this model on this budget or on that budget. And again, I can Control C this budget sheet, and if I want to put that in a different configuration, I can copy this sheet and then just paste that value in there in my workbench file. All right, remember the workbench file sits on top and links together everything that sits in your lower down definition sets. Okay, so that should be enough for you to understand how the budgets work. Just to reiterate again, the names that you find here must match the names of your budget category in your domain model setup file where you have defined the treatments. Okay, so let's go and just open that and make it absolutely clear. So if I go and open again my domain model, remember we discussed that in the preceding video, and I go down here to treatments. Then if I put them side by side, you'll see here my budget category here consists of the name renewals, maintenance, block pave, and concrete. So each of these names, budget categories, have to be represented in these columns. And always assume that the names are case sensitive. If I have a different budget category where my budgets are split across treatments, then of course I have to have a budget category for each one of these levels as well. So if I do, for example, this, and I change my budget to a split budget, so I put that in there, then I have to take all of these unique values and make sure that they are covered here in my budget, that there's a category for each one of the budgets. Right, so I hope that is clear. I'm just going to undo this. Right, so if you by accident don't have the budget category in your budget definition, Cassandra will tell you that, look, you've got a treatment that has a category ABC, but I don't find an ABC category in the selected budget. So you should get an informative error that tells you about the why Cassandra cannot run the model with the selected budget. Okay, so next up is lookups. So you'll remember in the previous video we said that your domain model will most likely make use of quite an extensive set of lookup data, and you can at the project level override any of the lookups that you have in your domain model. Now you don't have to put all of the values that are in your lookup tables for your domain model inside here. So if I want to just have one lookup set that is overwritten in my domain by my project, I can just delete the other sets, and Cassandra will just apply these two. I've got two sets, one called general and one called candidate selection. And so if I save this, then Juno Cassandra will make sure to only override the values that I put in here in my domain model. Okay, so the next aspect is rates. So I can have different rate sets in my project setup file. So a rate set you can configure with on any sheet that is where the name is prefixed with rates underscore, right? And then you can put the unit costs for the treatments in there for this specific project, which again, as I said, will override then in your domain model. These rates set, similar to the budget tag names that I've explained earlier, you can then define in your workbench file. So if I go back to my configuration here, you'll see here I've got treatment rate set, and this name in here matches the sheet name again here in my project file, and you must make sure that these names match exactly. Okay, then treatment colors. So basically, if I just take these treatments that I have in here and I put them on a sheet here, you can just use Excel's color definition tool to put any color in there, and this color is what will be used to determine the colors of the treatments in your forecast view in Juno Cassandra. So let me just run Juno Cassandra quickly, and I'll show you where that takes place. So here I've got Juno Cassandra open, and I'm just going to select again my workbench file, and I don't have to run my model again because I've run it earlier. I can just go directly to post-processing because the outputs should still be there. And if I go to parameter forecast and I go and select, for example, RUT as my parameter, and I click to get the forecast, then you can see my treatments that are shown here are shown in different colors, right? And these colors here are directly determined by the color definitions that I've put in here. So you can see thin AC, P, and H are all in this dark bluish gray. And then chip seals are in blue, my rehabs are in orange, and so forth. So you can define any colors you want here, and then that will play a role then in this definition of how the colors look in your parameter forecast view. Okay, next up is the concept of a KPI set. So I'll just delete that quickly, and then here I've got my KPI set defined. So let me just explain why you would like to have a KPI set defined for at the project level. So if I go back to Cassandra, then if I go to post-processing, you can see that you can look at parameter statistics for any of your model parameters. So I'm just going to focus on RUT. Now if I run this command and I get the statistics for this parameter, you can see there's a whole lot of statistics here. So let's say that you are interested in tracking the average and the 90th percentile RUT depth for all the elements in your model run. So if you want to track that, you will have to go to parameter rut, run this command, extract the average here, and also extract the 90th percentile here. And then if you want to do the same, for example, for something like your pavement distress index, then again you've got to go to the mean and you've got to scroll down and go to the 90th percentile, copy it out, and so forth to get a concise summary of the key performance indicators of your model run. So by defining key performance indicators up front, you make it much easier. So for example, here I've said that for the parameter rut, I'm interested in the 90th percentile, NASRA, and so forth. And if I save this as my KPI set, then I can just go to the post-processing tools, and instead of going to parameter statistics, where I can only look at one parameter at a time, I can go to the KPI forecast, and you'll see Cassandra has picked up the names of the KPI sets in my project setup file, and I can just click to get statistics, and now I can get concise statistics for each one of the parameters that are defined here in my key parameter set. So here in this set, I've just extracted the 90th percentile for these different model parameters, but you'll see I've also defined another set, and all KPI sets have to be prefixed with KPI underscore, and I've defined a KPI set 2 here, and you can see here I've selected 3 different statistics for each parameter. So this is a more comprehensive set of KPIs, but I only have to define them once. And by the way, if you want to know which statistics you can use in this drop-down list, I have put a sheet here called statistics codes, where you can find all of the available statistics that you can ask Cassandra to get for you. And if there's anything that you are interested in that's not in here, just ask us and we'll see if we can make that available. So here you can see I've got a more comprehensive KPI set, and if I head back to Juno Cassandra and I go to that KPI set 2, then you see very quickly I can get the statistics for all of those KPIs in one go, and then I can just copy this to clipboard and paste it in Excel and draw graphs and things like that as I need to. Alright, the last element then in our project setup file is the multi-criteria decision analysis setup file. We've discussed this already in the previous video where we spoke about the domain model setup file, but having this also in your project setup file allows you to override your domain model definition for your MCDA objectives in your project level file. And so here you can, for example, play around with these weights, or you can even remove some of these objectives from your multi-criteria decision analysis. I normally keep a blank column here, and then I copy these weights over here before I start making changes, so that I can keep track of what I've changed and how it looked originally if I want to roll back and see that my model is now performing worse than it did in a previous run. So that's just a hint of something that you can consider. So that's all of the elements that are involved in your project level definition, and I've noted that your budget tags and your treatment rate tags are linked back into your workbench file where you define your different model configurations, and so you have to make sure that those sheet names correspond with what you've got in your project level definition. So once you've got all of that, you should be all right to go and actually run your Cassandra model. So that's it for part 3 of this first tutorial in which we discussed the project level setup file. Thanks for watching.